We have racketeering enterprises, multiple racketeering enterprises that are all operating in totally antisocial ways to the detriment of livelihoods of Maine, to the culture of this state, the very fabric of this state. We have the dictionary definition of organized crime.
We welcome you to episode 4 of the Pastor's Office podcast. And I have a very special guest in the studio today, Steve Robinson. Thank you for being here.
Of course. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, you're welcome, man. We were talking earlier. We have some things in common playing Class C football together. You were a Dexter grad.
Yes.
And I was a John Baptist Crusader wearing purple on the football field.
Yes. I still think you probably caused some of the concussions that went undiagnosed when I was a high school athlete. But
so you're the quarterback, I was a linebacker, and both of our schools were probably competing for the largest losing record in Maine high school football history.
Yes, the bottom of the Little Ten Conference.
Yeah. But that's not why we're here. We don't want to talk about that. One of the things we have done, Steve, in the first 3 episodes of this podcast is just talking about the 3 institutions that are God ordained. Number 1 being marriage, number 2 being the church, and 3 government. But now this 4th episode, I thought there was no better person, no resident expert in our state to talk about this one topic of misinformation. And misinformation, I guess if you looked at Webster's or Cambridge Dictionary, it's the withholding or the falsifying of truth, whether you're doing that intentionally or unintentionally. It is the perversion of truth. And, one of the things that you as a journalist and me as a pastor, a preacher, both of our day-to-day, week-to-week agendas should be the truth. As a preacher, I'm opening the Word of God. I'm proclaiming it. But likewise, as a journalist, you would think common sense would be handling truth. That's not been the case in the state of Maine.
It hasn't been. And I think that there's, I guess we always want to strive to make sure that our information is accurate. We want to help create an accurate information environment so that people can make decisions based on that, whether those are political decisions or, decisions to move to a certain school or a certain city, whatever that is. We want to make sure that people have accurate, reliable information, especially about things that are sensational and of the public interest.
Yeah.
If there are ongoing criminal conspiracies that are undermining the quality of life of the people of the state, we think that they should have information about that. If there's, government money being misappropriated, or if there's public corruption happening, we think the people should have information about that. Or if there's, a political ideology making its way into public institutions, like our public school systems, and is, asserting claims about the truth and indoctrinating children, well, we think that people should know about that. And so what we try to do is, I think, probably less of a calling than interpreting the spiritual, eternal truths, and is more trying to figure out what's actually happening on the ground. What are the facts on the ground? Where is government money going? What are government institutions doing? And these days, what are criminal organizations doing? How is power being wielded to impact the lives of the people of Maine?
One of the things that is interesting is both in the world of investigative journalism and in the ministry, we have found that we also are a bit rare, unfortunately, of just proclaiming the whole counsel of God's word. We came down as a church in 2020 and verse by verse, chapter by chapter, unapologetically preach the word. Well, people respond to that. You're seeing the same thing where you would think it'd be a no-brainer where journalists and the mainstream media would be proclaiming truth. That has not been the case. And yet, correct me if I'm wrong, that the Maine Wire, which you are the editor-in-chief of, the Maine Wire is the fastest growing investigative journalist publication in all of New England.
Yes, I'm not aware of one that's growing faster. There might be some in Massachusetts that are trying to catch up with us, but we've gone. I took over the Maine Wire in 2023, and so in that time we've gone from 25,000 hits on the website in a given month to now we're pretty much between 500,000 and 1 million a month.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, probably age, Facebook is big in Maine. Mainers are huge on Facebook relative to other states. And that's kind of like our front page or our primetime news. And I think we're over 130,000 followers on our Facebook page. So we're just behind maybe the Bangor Daily News and
but surpassed the Portland Press Herald.
Oh yeah, a while ago, yeah.
Which is that does my heart good. I must admit that.
Yeah. Well, and the Portland Press Herald really is just the Portland Press Herald, the Lewiston Sun Journal, the Brunswick Times Record, they're all just one organization passing themselves off as local brands.
Yeah.
It's the same company. It's the same, or I should say, it's the same LC3 that's endowed by the National Trust for Local News. But they have the websites and they have the brand and those social media properties. Really, there's 3, maybe 4, you could argue, separate, distinct investigative news outlets in the state. And then there's the TV news, which really, they don't do much by way of original investigative news. And the constraints of their medium mean that, they've got to prepare a TV package every night. They're in and out. They want the car accident. They want a quick statement from a politician. They don't have time to spend really digging into something. But yeah, we've grown very quickly, and I think people are responding to our style of news. But also we're embracing new technology like podcasts, videos, social media, delivering news to people where they are, rather than expecting them to become hungry and thirsty for information about Maine politics and in their society.
You were, we had a conversation earlier about your time with the Howie Carr show as the executive producer. You saw the writing on the wall where AM, FM, traditional radio was slowly but surely becoming a little bit of an ancient dinosaur. It was becoming a thing of the past. So you certainly cut your teeth. I'm sure learned a lot in that time with the Howie Carr show. But since entering into this space of the podcasts and visual media, has it been an opportunity to reach a demographic that you think otherwise would not have been?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think it first dawned on me that radio was going to have some issues when I started learning that electric vehicles, actually, the electromagnetic field created by the battery in the electrical system interferes with the AM, amplitude modulated radio signal. So an AM radio, you can't get it really in electric vehicles. So I started thinking about the technology, and the spectrum is actually maybe more valuable for other uses, talking about like the radio frequency spectrum. So I was looking at it from a scientific perspective rather than from a consumer perspective. But just obviously everything is moving over to your smartphone.
Yeah.
And within that smartphone, there's so many different platforms that you can be on. And the demographic really follows a given platform. In Maine, people who are under 30 or under 40 really not going to be on Facebook that much, but the older people are still on Facebook.
Yeah.
And I say that with no disparagement, but there's just people are using the social media that they know, that they're comfortable with, and they get stuck in those patterns. And rather than putting our material on our website or Substack and expecting people to come find us, we want to be proactive with going out and putting our content where they are. TikTok's a little bit of a weird one for us because it's run by the CCP, and I don't allow TikTok in my household, but we still have a TikTok presence there because there are young people are there consuming media and consuming content, and we want to. In the same way that a ministry wants to get out there and evangelize, your what you have to say, we also want to make sure that somebody who is looking for information has an opportunity to find us, regardless of where they're looking for it.
A lot of stuff I want to get to towards the end of our podcast. I mean, obviously, the exposure of a lot of the corruption and the fraud in the home health care, the organized crime of the Chinese government, and the marijuana grows. But if you're okay with this, Steve, I'd like to just go back a little bit about early life. You made mention off camera. We just talked a little bit about rural Maine and your experience with church. I believe you said it was a Methodist church. It stood out to me, the same conversation we're talking about of truth. And you noticed that even the truth of God's word was slowly but surely falling off the scene in the church that you were a part of.
Yeah, and I think part of that was peculiar to our family. Both of my grandmothers were in Methodist churches.
Yeah.
And I think both of the Methodist churches, maybe my mother's church is still around, but I know that my Grammy Robinson's church is no longer in existence. But they were kind of waning. They certainly weren't full of young, vibrant families like Calvary Chapel is on Sundays.
Yeah.
It was it was an older crowd for sure. The demographics weren't looking good. You could probably have predicted where it was headed, but. I think for cultural and familial reasons, our family just kind of stopped going. Maybe it just wasn't convenient for us. It didn't fit into our weekend plans. We had to mow the lawn. I wanted to be out at camp, hanging out fishing. Other things began to take, priority over it. But I mean, even since then, the Methodist tradition has really never appealed to me.
Right.
I think I kind of fell away from my personal faith in high school, more just as it was provocative. It was provocative for me to get in an argument with the biology teacher over evolution from a Christian perspective, and then get in an argument with an English professor who happened to be Christian about the Christian perspective. I was just a sophist, just an argumentative little brat.
But you said you had an experience again in college, which is rare. I mean, especially at a college as liberal as Bowdoin. But there was a Christian club organization that was happening there that you got plugged into. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So I started writing for the college newspaper, the Bowdoin Orient.
Yeah.
And kind of, not knowing it at the time, but set myself down a path of being an outspoken conservative polemicist, I guess, for the conservative newspaper. Or the newspaper, I was the only conservative writing for it. And because of the public nature of that, I was introduced to Rob Gregory, who runs the Bowdoin Christian Fellowship, and his wife Sim runs a women's group, and they kind of together as a husband and wife run the ministry that was at the time on campus. And so I participated in the Bible studies with the Bowdoin Christian Fellowship, and I think one of the things that really started to appeal to me was, at the time I was reading some of the classical political philosophy, like Plato's Republic. Mm-hmm. And, you've got I guess there used to be anyways, the debate over whether it was literal or it was figurative. And there was a metaphor that Plato was working with here. I think it's pretty much settled that it wasn't literal the way he wrote the Republic. But having to read through for these esoteric messages hidden within these ancient texts, and then moving from classical political philosophy to a Bible study with Rob Gregory, and looking through Jesus's parables and trying to decipher the hidden esoteric meaning there, really intrigued me and kind of hooked me into reading and studying the text more carefully. And then through some family tragedy, we were kind of brought together at another church in northern Maine, and I was rebaptized with my brother and my father. Yeah. And since that time, have been a Bible believing Christian, not necessarily attending church on Sundays as much as I ought to be. But yeah,
this gentleman Rob that was serving as a campus pastor, he got kind of ousted, or at least they did. Yeah, attempted to.
No, they did. The college came to him and forced him to. They tried to force him to sign an agreement that said they would allow people who were out and out Satanists, not just to join the organization, but to lead it.
Yeah.
It was this non-discrimination policy that was, it was popping up in a lot of college campuses. It was it's kind of like the DEI statements that a lot of the college employees are forced to sign. And Rob said, no, I'm not signing this. Like, this is the Bowdoin Christian Fellowship.
Right.
If there's going to be student leaders of it, they should be Christians. And as a result, they were kicked off campus. But Rob is clever and resourceful, and he prevailed, and he bought a building right on the corner of campus, and even had a little sign made up that says Bowdoin Christian Fellowship in the same style as every building on the campus.
Yeah.
And tacked it on the side. So no matter who's driving through, he's actually got one of the better buildings on campus.
I love that.
It's right on campus.
There's a portion of the book of Acts where likewise a gentleman came in. He was preaching the gospel to a bunch of Jews in the local synagogue of a city. They didn't like him. They threatened him to beat him up. So he goes in and starts a house church right next door. And it's similar. So Rob says, well, okay, if you can't get him to be proselytized, well, let's do our best to move next door and still push the gospel, which, as far as you know, he's still doing that.
Yes.
That's still happening.
Yep, he is. There's still Bowdoin Christian Fellowship. It just still exists. It's just an unsanctioned renegade.
Yeah.
It's a renegade Bowdoin Christian Fellowship.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
So your time at the college, let's go back to, I think it's the Bowdoin Orient is the name of the campus newspaper. Yep. I went back and did some research. I read some of the papers in 2010, 11 that you as a student had written. One of them coming out as a campus conservative.
Yes.
And what was there a backlash that you were, even by just identifying? I mean, now we know, of course. I mean, here we are in 2026. We've seen some of the crazy that is happening for both Christians or Jewish men and women, or certainly conservative students on some of these big college campuses. But even if you go back 15 years or so, like in 2010, 11, were you seeing what was the writing on the wall then?
It was nowhere near as toxic then as it is now, for sure. And I still know people who are students at Bowdoin and have followed a similar path.
Yeah.
And so I've got a pretty good gauge of how toxic things are on college campuses for conservatives. It wasn't like that at all. I actually experienced a lot of people who would come to me and say, "Hey, I really like your column. I agree with you. Like, I'm not going to those college Republican meetings, and I'm not going to like publicly let people know
Right.
how I feel because I don't want that stigma. But like, I like your column." There was some, if I was like gave my name at the student union post office to collect my mail, and someone looked over, "Oh, that's Steve Robinson."
Yeah.
But I think it wasn't as nasty or vitriolic as it would be if a similar experience were to be repeated today. I think it was, I ended up befriending even my harshest critics, people who would respond to me with op-eds. I even had at times college professors responding to op-eds that I was writing, about like the mortgage crisis or bizarre things, whatever I thought was interesting to write about at the time. It was a very, I thought, it's a wonderful learning experience to be writing and expressing your views in public and making mistakes publicly, because that's how you learn. That's how you get better. To develop an opinion that you're going to stand by and you're going to have to defend. It's different than just like kind of pondering a topic, quietly.
Mm-hmm.
And my grades definitely suffered because of my column. There's many times where I had to decide between finishing a paper or finishing a column, and I was more interested in the column than I was.
So at this time, were you convinced that this is where your path was leading as far as into journalism as a college student?
No, not really. Not really. Even when I graduated, I didn't have much of an idea of what I wanted to do. It was something of the political variety for sure. I ended up going to, my college advisor was Jean Yarborough, who's still at the college. She might be one of maybe 4 conservative college professors left east of the Mississippi.
Yeah.
She's an endangered species for sure.
Yeah.
But she helped me get into the Hertog Political Studies program, which was a wonderful program down in Washington, D.C. We stayed at the George Washington University and just spent 6 weeks reading political philosophy with some of the great, master instructors from around the conservative pockets of the vast right-wing conspiracy. And being in D.C., I kind of had, through that program, a little bit of time to try and find a job and figure out what I wanted to do, try and, make a go of it in Washington, D.C., and ended up working for Regnery Publishing Company, which was the biggest conservative publisher in the country. But they also had a sister company called Human Events, which did a newspaper that actually circulated in Washington, D.C. It was Ronald Reagan's favorite newspaper.
Wow.
It's no longer in print anymore. The website, I think, has different ownership. Not sure exactly what happened with that. But that was kind of my first foray into conservative media.
And you were writing. You were,
I was the lowest paid employee of Regnery Publishing. I'm certain of it. I was a sales associate and I was selling books. That was my job, was to sell books. And it wasn't even like going out and hustling and trying to sell books. It was picked up the phone, and when someone needed books, I processed their order for books.
Do you look back, I mean, those formidable years for where you are now?
Oh, for sure. Because I met, somebody who was very, a great mentor for me in journalism. And I started moonlighting for Human Events, and I was writing news stories, doing investigative journalism, and then bringing it to the editor and just saying like, "Here, like, will you publish this? You can have it for free."
Yeah.
And ended up giving them some front page stories that they actually published. And so I was kind of like, doing my job and then also trying to do some journalism on the side. And it never, that never, evolved into like a career in journalism in Washington, D.C. I'm kind of grateful that it didn't. But that was my first kind of taste of the media world. And from there on, it kind of just, you know, uh, let life come to me a little bit. I moved back to Maine, ended up doing some work at a think tank, the same think tank that I'm at now.
Yeah.
And I actually got my job with Howie Carr doing a stand-up comedy bit. You might not remember Ken and Mike,
No.
radio hosts on WGAN.
No, but I did not know you did stand-up comedy.
Well, I didn't, and don't. The Ken and Mike had been on radio together for 10 years.
Yeah.
They were an institution. They had a highly rated morning show, and they wanted to celebrate their 10-year anniversary with a roast.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had Governor Baldacci and former Portland Mayor Ethan Strimling and Howie Carr was he was like the celebrity roaster, but they brought all these people together to roast Ken and Mike and asked me to MC it.
Okay.
And so I took it very seriously, and I worked on my material, and I was just ready to just blister everybody there. I just like, it was nasty. Governor Baldacci, I think, took it very personally that night. But I just had like good material for everybody, and no one else prepared. So in
Howie Carr
comparison,
I'm assuming.
yeah, they offered me a job the next day.
Yeah.
His wife did, and they just happened to be going off into independent syndication as a radio company, and I had no idea about audio production, soundboards, radio. Had no idea about any of it.
Mm-hmm.
But Howie had seen some of my work on welfare fraud, and they watched me, make some jokes at Governor Baldacci's expense. They're like, yeah, let's hire him and have him, move him down to Boston.
It's
so
funny,
we went.
Preparation. When we planted a church, the team that came with us, one of the first books that a friend of mine asked me to read, and we had our staff read it, was Why Men Hate Going to Church. And it talked about this culture of men, doesn't matter what our hobbies may be. Well, I'm not a car guy, but I can appreciate a guy who is like, wow, you know your stuff, you're good at what you do. I can walk into their shop, it's neat, it's organized. And there's something about a man who typically responds to excellence. And something that was really challenging and motivating for me, is even as a pastor, is if I want to win the hearts of men, which of course, when you win the hearts of men, you win the hearts of families. And then when you win the hearts of families, communities are changed. And I think, sadly, a lot of the evangelical world has lost that. I think oftentimes men are just very dissuaded or turned off from church. So one of the things we, agreed as a team is that whatever we do, whether it's worship, whether it's coffee, and certainly if it's Bible preparation and presentation, we're going to do it to the utmost of our ability, because it's a way to honor the Lord. So it's fascinating to hear you say that about you just were prepared, and yet it opened a door for you to, Howie Carr took note, brought you on. How many years were you with Howie Carr from there?
I think for about 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah. So and through that, I had some extraordinary experiences.
Yeah.
We did a live radio show from the White House when President Trump. This was, I think, in his first year of the presidency. So I was like in the East Room of the White House, like producing / I was the second mic, not a co-host, but a second mic, occasionally talking on the show, and sitting across the table from the president of the United States.
A boy from Dexter.
Yeah, it was wild. But he'd been on the show a lot because Howie had a whole bunch of stations in New Hampshire, which is an important state in a Republican primary.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of the presidential candidates that year were competing for time on the show. And Trump was very intuitive about Howie's reach and his connection with his audience, and made sure to call in to the show. And it was my first experience with the Trump phenomenon of how viral some of the things he would say would go. Is like, Marco Rubio is walking out there with those thick-heeled boots so he can look taller. And, Trump would just like make fun of those boots.
Blast him.
And then it's just like a national headline sweeping around all the, the BuzzFeed and CNN, are picking it up. It was like my first experience with this weird media phenomenon around Trump.
Well, one of the things that was a blessing for me to see is that Trump would turn it on the the blatant bias of the media, and Trump would just call him out.
Yeah.
So this episode talked about misinformation. You go from writing in college to the Bowdoin Orient to then your time down in Washington D.C. now with Howie Carr, and getting really great exposure. Was it something that you had always known, or were you just being quickly made aware that there was a true misinformation plague that is happening, not just nationally, but locally? When was this really being made aware to you?
Well, before I went to work for Howie, I was actually at, the Maine Policy Institute, which had a different name at the time, and the Maine Wire was much smaller, and I was trying to do then a version of what I've been doing for the last 3 years, and essentially got hired away from that. And the idea then was, I guess, to, have an alternative to the left-wing media, the liberal media. So I was aware of it, but I think gradually my understanding of some of the problems and the inherent flaws in the way people get information about their political reality it developed and sharpened. And it wasn't really until actually I took a job working at Barstool Sports on the Kirk Minahan show, which is not political. I mean, talked about political things, but it was more of a comedy podcast. And I ended up working with Kirk on a cold case podcast, trying to find out what happened to this woman named Jennifer Fay, a girl named Jennifer Fay, who disappeared in 1989 from Brockton, Massachusetts. And this investigation in the middle of COVID took us down to, rural meth-plagued South Carolina, running around trailer parks, trying to find this guy that we had reason to believe he'd killed some people. So that was it's weird to say, it was a fun experience. That's how I stayed sane during COVID, was chasing meth heads around South Carolina. But that experience of how do you go and find out what happened to Jennifer Fay 30 years ago, knocking on doors in Brockton, South Carolina, when we drove out to Watertown, New York to talk to somebody, talking to everybody, trying to gather this information. It was one of my first exposures to the long form journalism. Whereas when I was working for Howie, every single day, show ends at 7, you got to get ready to talk again at 3 p.m. the next day. Mm-hmm. So you got to figure out what are you going to talk about for 4 hours the following day. And that kind of vicious, very fast paced cycle doesn't lend itself to a lot of deep critical analysis of the fact pattern and interviews and what people are saying and, what the information suggests. So it was a change of pace in a journalism, I guess, in terms of the style of journalism that really intrigued me. And so I took a little break from everything with a camper van and my wife, and we drove 35,000 miles around the country and just totally dropped out of society. It was awesome.
No, this is post-COVID, or COVID is right in the...
Probably tail end of COVID. There was still some COVID lockdown stuff.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, let's talk about COVID for a little bit.
Yeah.
Because,
this was formative for you guys.
It certainly was.
Yeah.
As a church, I was serving as the assistant pastor of Calvary Chapel Bangor. And of course, Ken Graves, who he was quickly, like many, realizing, wait a minute, after the 14 days to slow the spread, Walmart's open, the marijuana shops, because they're deemed medical, they're opening. Strip clubs were being opened before the blood-bought bride of Christ, the church, was allowed to be open. So, I was assistant pastor when Ken brought forward what was going to be a legal proceeding against our governor for her unconstitutional, mandates. We came down right around that time and planted a church in Portland. So it was a unique time, and we did the same thing. We just said, hey, we're going to let people make their own decisions. You want to wear a mask? Wear a mask. You don't want to wear a mask? Don't wear a mask. But, misinformation certainly, I think, was happening on a national, worldwide. And you remember during COVID coming down Interstate 95 and you had those big DOT signs like, hey, free hunting license if you get the vax. And you're like, that seems strange.
Seems a little gross.
That seems a little gross.
Yeah.
You're going to offer me this if I do that. So share some on, as a journalist's perspective, even if that was during a time where you and your family were just hopping in a van and traveling around the nation, what was your perspective on all that?
Well, it was interesting because I was still in the the media, quote unquote. I was doing a podcast when everything started to unfold. So it was something we were talking about, and I think we were, because you're reading different publications and social media, probably aware of what was happening a little bit faster than most people, because we're just trying to figure out, hey, well, this is weird. These videos coming out of China kind of look strange. What's going on? So I think initially, I bought into it and read some stuff that was like, oh, this is going to be kind of bad. And I actually remember my first pre-plague shopping trip at Wegmans, going around and just loading up my shopping cart. And I was like, I'm going to get a bunch of lasagna stuff.
There you go.
that's common sense. That's a good survival.
Did you know that
right?
toilet paper was going to be in high need at that time?
I did, yeah.
Okay, so
Obviously,
lasagna and toilet paper.
stacked up on toilet
Yeah.
paper and lasagna. And I remember just walking around thinking how bizarre, what a weird time it was.
Weird time.
And when we cleaned out our apartment in Boston to go on the camper van trip, I still had all those boxes of lasagna noodles. I never made one lasagna the entire time. But that memory will always stick with me of walking around and just thinking, what a bizarre time this is. But Massachusetts actually had it a lot better than Maine, is what I've come to learn, coming back to the state, and then through my family being here, their experiences. Massachusetts was like Texas compared to Maine.
Isn't that
I
unique?
could go anywhere I wanted to. Maybe one time someone was like, "Hey, wear a mask." Never had any interaction with law enforcement. I was media. I was doing a podcast that was like, we're making crude jokes, and for some reason I was exempt from all the travel restrictions.
Yeah.
Never had to prove that though.
You were deemed essential.
Yes, I was an essential joke maker.
Now, some of your close proximity to Calvary Chapel pastors is seeing some of the legal issues that have come out of. So, whether Ken Graves, suing the governor in Calvary Chapel Bangor, Pastor Greg Houston at Calvary Chapel Belfast.
He dragged me up Mount Katahdin.
You guys have Mount Katahdin?
Yeah, well, he almost had to carry down a dead guy.
I was unaware of that.
I told them all. I was like, if I die up here, there's going to be a lot of conspiracy theories about you guys. So you better make sure I survive this.
This was a meeting to talk about what was going on with him and the UMaine Hutchinson Center?
No, this was something that we did with Nick Adolphson from Christian Civic League. Okay. This was very much a Greg-inspired hike.
Yeah, it sounds nice.
It seems like his style.
Well, so they've hired a wonderful lawyer who's out of state, and the gentleman Matt Staver, who's the founding legal counsel for the Liberty Council. And back to the point you made about Massachusetts had it better than Maine. Matt Staver, who has quite literally made a career fighting at the Supreme Court level. I mean, he has taken some of the biggest religious liberty cases all over the nation. He said, after COVID, and when all these things with Ken Graves at Bangor, Greg down in Belfast, and then representing the lady in our church here, and we'll talk about her in just a moment, Matt Staver has said he was so unaware of just how liberal, godless, and egregious a lot of what is happening in Maine has been, especially from the legal systems. Yeah. So for Matt Staver to say that is pretty shocking.
Yeah, I would take it even further and say that Maine is foremost in its persecution of Christians.
Yeah.
The state persecution of Christians through coercion, through intimidation tactics, through the withdrawal of government money is more severe in Maine than any other state that I've experienced.
That's quite a statement. And so we should camp on that for a moment, because there are some would say, oh, come on, Steve, persecution really? Because, people in their mind deem persecution a certain way. Certainly there are people around the world who are having their lives threatened. But persecution is happening in this nation, more specifically in this state. There's a lady in our church, her name was Emily, and her daughter, who at the time, Emily and her 8-year-old daughter were fellowshipping with us. And the dad, they were never married, but there's a 50-50 custody. That dad had a gripe against God, against the Bible, and has since brought this mom and daughter to family court here in Cumberland County. And the judge, who, by the way, is and identifies as a lesbian, the judge has cited that this mom cannot bring her daughter to church, which is unbelievable. I mean, talking about the violation.
It's literally unbelievable. I actually didn't believe it when it was first brought to my attention. I was like, there's no way. Like, how can a judge have that
Make that decision?
How can a judge step in between that family decision? It's bizarre.
Talk about certain unalienable rights, like worship God.
Yeah.
And yet that is happening. Persecution is at our front doorstep here in Maine, and certainly here in Portland, Maine.
So she can't bring her daughter to church, but if she wanted to bring her daughter to, say, the Barbara Bush Children's Hospital Gender Clinic.
Exactly.
I mean, she might be forced to do that if dad decides, that that's in the best interest of the child. I don't know. It depends on who the judge is and what their political beliefs are.
Or the Yarmouth Public School, where they're, doing drag shows and transgender lessons and critical race theory and all the stuff that's happening at the school that this young gal is going to. So, from a journalist perspective, because you said it's been how many years now since you have come back and been the editor-in-chief of the Maine Wire?
3 years.
So 3 years. And some massive stories, you and your team, your small team, and what an awesome team, God has gifted you with. This small team of yours has exposed some, I will use the word again, unbelievable scandal that is happening from the top down in our state. And again, our topic this afternoon is misinformation. Why is this not being brought? Why is the Maine Wire the only people talking about, from a journalist perspective? Let's talk about home health care scandal, fraud, corruption. Let's talk about the Chinese Communist Party and all the pot grows illegally happening in our state. Share about, some of the things that you have been seeing in this realm.
Well, I think that there's an institutional quality to this where the newspapers, the legacy media, whatever you want to call them, the liberal media, they've all gone to, I guess a journalism school, or they've learned in this kind of like club universe, one way of doing things and one perspective on the world. And they tend to be liberals, they tend to be leftists, and they're kind of standing over there looking at, politics, government, society, what's happening. And we're, a little bit more, I would say, innovative, and have different backgrounds. And I view journalism as it's a trade. Like anybody can learn how to do journalism.
Right.
You're just gathering information and presenting it in a way that allows some people to consume it and is trustworthy and accurate. There's no like high priest of Columbia journalism school that you have to go to divine like the truth. You don't become an elite person who is allowed to interpret reality for people.
Right.
It's really just a trade in the style of writing and building relationships with people. That's what journalism is. And anybody can learn how to do it. Doesn't matter what your background is. But at some point, we decided that the only people who could do journalism were people who came from wealthy families and went to journalism school and were liberals. And you used to have tabloid, like the Boston Herald would have, people with just high school educations who got to talk to cops and firefighters sitting around the bar, and they'd get this perspective. They would get like a different perspective than what you have now coming from the legacy media. So some of the bias you're seeing isn't just an intentional political, like we're going to cover up for the Democrats and attack Republicans because we're partisans and we just want to advance a political agenda. Sure, there's some of that going on, but a lot of it is just institutional, just baked into who they are and their perspective on the world, and the lack of ideological diversity, the lack of even, physical, geographical, biological diversity that you have at those organizations. So they just have a different perspective on things than we do. And some of the stories you talked about are a great example where the Calvary Chapel Belfast, out and out wins this request for proposal,
right?
Fairly has the best proposal,
Yep.
And then it's taken away from them, and it turns out that the guy, the guy in charge of that had Janet Mills at his wedding.
Yeah.
During COVID, when you weren't supposed to have church gatherings, but the guy who yanked the proposal away from them has Janet Mills at his wedding, and there's all kinds of weird things there. So for me, that's like an interesting part of the story. But you've never seen that reported.
Mm-hmm.
The whole perspective that the Bangor Daily News had was, communities are worried that Christian church will do Christian things. That was, I guess, a kind of a joking interpretation of what they were reporting, but it's actually what they were concerned with. There was a woman who wrote an op-ed placed in the Bangor Daily News, said, I logged onto this Greg Houston's channel and I couldn't believe it. I was seeing him talk about Christian things. And it was like, I can only imagine the editors of the Bangor Daily News gasping. Like, what a scoop! What a scoop we have here!
Yeah.
Can you believe this bigotry that's happening? So the only thing we can do is totally invert the RFP process and make a wild exception to take this away from this church and attack them and persecute them and take value from them because of the amount of time, money, blood, toil that they've invested into this. Trying to get this RFP and winning it and planning for it. So in a very real way, yes, they were persecuted for their beliefs.
Yeah.
Because of their beliefs and because of, ideological, Christophobic, anti-Christian bigotry that the University of Maine system has, and that's prevalent throughout the entire state government, they were persecuted.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And to me, that was just as easy to see as like, saying you're wearing jeans.
Right.
It wasn't like, that doesn't seem like an opinion driven thing. They were vocal about it, right? They came out and said in writing, take this away from them. They have Christian beliefs.
Yeah. Yeah. So with our case here with the mom and the daughter, it's the same thing where, she and myself as the pastor who was a witness, we're literally standing before the judge, the lawyers, the courtroom here in Cumberland County, and they're saying things with such a blatant bias. So, Pastor, you believe that there's actually a war on good versus evil. Is that correct? Like, how patronizing. I'm like, well, no, the Bible, teaches that.
Yeah.
So you believe in heaven and hell. Is that correct? So there's such a
being interrogated by a
You're
literal demon of the
literally
existence of
happening.
evil.
Yeah, I mean, just amazing that this is what we're living in. I think about a creed. So, like, as a pastor, you look at the scriptures and think 1 Timothy 3, verse 15, where the house of God, the church of the living God, is the pillar and ground for truth. We should be a source of truth. Jesus Christ is truth, the word of God. But of course, that is not what every pastor or ministry worker, they don't adhere to that. I was looking at like creeds that journalists, I mean, maybe you probably recognize some of these terms. The Journalist Creed, college professor at the Missouri School of Journalism, his name Walter William, 1914. He was known as the father of writing the Journalist Creed, where it says, I believe a journalist should write only what he holds to be true in his heart. There should be thinking that is clear. It should have accuracy. There should be fairness, and fundamental good journalism has this at its core. You look at another one, the Society of Professional Journalists Code, the SPJ. Seek truth and report it, period. Is that what is happening predominantly with much of the media in our state or in our nation today?
No, I don't think so. And to be totally fair and give you all perspectives, there's plenty of people that we've reported on. Former Senate President Troy Jackson calls us the Maine Liar, which is very funny, very original. He had to work hard for that one, because we reported on the fact that he got an FHA mortgage with a low interest loan in Augusta, where he was living, while also getting reimbursements to travel back to Aroostook County. The fact pattern says we're not lying about it.
Covered.
Yeah,
that was true.
Yeah, we uncovered something that, based on the documents and based on his own admission, by the way, is true. I mean, he's admitted that what we reported is true, but at the same time has decided to slander us. But I think that some of the bias that you see is not people intentionally trying to pull one over on their readers. And again, some of that is happening, but a lot of it I've found is just a lack of curiosity and laziness.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to text, 4 or 5 lobbyists in Augusta and get some good gossip and then run that. Well, sources say this, sources say that, or to treat politics like you're refereeing a cage match between Republicans and Democrats, as opposed to trying to figure out what's really happening.
Mm-hmm.
Looking past, the statements that people have put out, like for me, at least, press conferences are boring. I don't want to, except for Secretary of State Bellows, when she had to do the press conference over the ballots, the absentee ballots that showed up in an Amazon Prime package.
Right.
And blamed me for it, and then refused to take my questions about it, even though she learned about it.
That one wasn't boring.
Me. That one wasn't boring.
Yeah.
That was fun to be at. But for the most part, when people have these prepared canned statements and they're just, saying talking points, or it's a press release, that's boring reporting to me. What's interesting to me is getting out into some kind of forgotten corner of the state to try to figure out what's happening, seeing firsthand, talking with neighbors, talking with people in the community, poring over public records to try to put together a picture of, trends, or find, things that people should be paying attention to, but they're not. That's what's interesting to me.
Yeah.
And like the Chinese organized crime is a good example of that, because it's not something that you can ever figure out just, calling people or, Googling.
Right.
You're not gonna be able to Google your way to figuring out that there's this huge, Chinese communist supported conspiracy unraveling in your state. You really have to be out in the field. And I learned a lot about the physicality and the need to be out in the community in order to do good journalism in the process of doing that. But I think that aspect is very much lacking in a lot of the newspapers Definitely the TV companies. They just want the quick, easy narrative.
Laziness. Yeah. You know, it's funny you say that. My father retired from corporate world, but rural Bangor area, he has been doing Uber really as a hobby to keep busy. So
Yeah.
he's out in the community meeting people all the time. I'm telling you, Steve, my father was on to some of this Chinese marijuana legal grows years ago, just by simply being on the community and taking inventory of what was happening. You said something recently. It was at the Lincoln Memorial Dinner. And I thought you said something really fascinating where it's a win-win from the Maine Wire's perspective, because either you guys encourage the mainstream media to get better at their job, and that's a win, or they just keep being lazy and you guys get, you grow in your influence.
Yeah. I mean, I've said before, it feels like the left in Maine is conspiring to make me famous, because they're doing all these ridiculous things, allowing organized crime, Medicaid fraud, the Chinese grows, persecuting churches, and then also the left-wing media won't report on it. So we're the only people reporting on it. And these are just wild, incredible stories for people who aren't kind of in the bubble in Maine. So when national audiences hear about some of the stuff that's happening in Maine, and we're the only people who they can, get to go tell those stories on big podcasts, it's very helpful. Their one-sidedness and the left's extremeness has been key to our growth. But you're right in that we are a media outlet and a journalistic outlet, seeking to inform people about what's happening, what the information reality is in Maine. But we want just a better society and a better culture, I guess. If we're advocating for something, we're advocating for a more adversarial press that views itself in opposition to the state rather than a partner to the state or just a mouthpiece for the state. But we also want our journalism to, contribute to a better, healthier society, a better, healthier culture, which, by the way, all the other newspapers and media outlets in the state would say they do. They would all say the same exact thing. They would say that their existence, I've seen fundraising letters from the Bangor Daily News where they actually say that, there's studies show that communities with strong local newspapers have lower taxes. So they're presenting lower taxes as a inherently good thing and a reason to support the Bangor Daily News. So to say that there's a newspaper advocating for a better, healthier culture or a better, healthier society,
misinformation.
But I don't think that makes us into like an advocacy organization or a lobbying organization, the way that some of our critics would try to dismiss our work. But we're not so selfish in that we would like the competition of them coming to Scoops as well. Like, we would like them to be better at their jobs.
Genuinely believe that. And again, just to make the crossover here in the pastor's office, the crossover is similar, where we became, here in the local evangelical community, we unintentionally became, I'll use the term, the black sheep, because we were questioning the narrative that we were told concerning COVID. And then
you guys were going to spread the disease.
Can you imagine that, as opposed to the suicide rates that were going up, the drug overdose rates that were going up, the isolation that was happening, if ever there was a time that the Church of God needed to be open, and yet many churches weren't, they were told not to. So we unintentionally became the black sheep. But what we can honestly say, I hear what you're saying. We like what you're saying. We just want to be an influence to other ministers and ministries to stand on the truth of God's word. I mean, we've been deemed political because the things we speak on, we go from Genesis to Revelation. I have found that the word of God will touch every issue in life, including gender and sexuality. And our desire is that it would give an emboldening of other ministers who have been told separation of church and state, pastor, you can't go there. From your perspective, I want to talk about this. From your perspective of doing journalism and seeing some of the major dividing line and divisive issues in our culture, are you sensing that there has been an abdicating, maybe a dereliction of duty of pulpits in America, pulpits in the state, of not speaking on some of these issues that pastors and churches should be speaking on?
Well, I would say there's a timidity for sure, and there's what I think is a valid concern about the government coming after tax exempt statuses. Yeah. And I'm not familiar enough with the broad financial picture of the health of churches, but it would be challenging for any organization that is relying on tax deductible contributions to have that taken away. And that's a very real threat. I mean, we were just talking about the persecution of Christians by the state. Rick Savage at Sunday River Brewing Company gets his liquor license away because he doesn't toe the line on COVID. Dr. Meryl Nass, medical license taken away because she criticized the governor in a radio. There are many other examples of people who have had the power of government wielded against them for not, bending the knee and submitting. So I think I'm not going to, judge any pastor for not coming out and being a firebrand. But I think that there has been a little bit of timidity amongst, faith leaders. They're kind of following the, render unto Caesar what's Caesar's.
Right.
That's what we hear. Turn the other cheek. Politics is just going to be politics. That's a totally separate realm from what we're doing here. We're just going to, take care of our own little private sphere. But I would think that, I guess for me, the concept that comes to mind is Alexis de Tocqueville described in Democracy in America. The French guy came to America in the 1830s, lied, said he was going to be writing something about the jails for the French government. He was really writing what I think is one of the greatest books ever written about American democracy. And he had a term called individualism, which he thought was going to be a threat to democratic societies. And individualism for him wasn't, originality or, people being, unique individuals, whatever. Individualism for him was the habit of men in democratic eras to become comfortable and to withdraw from public society into their own private sphere, their own families, their own businesses, and to reduce their level of participation in the administration of public business. And I think to a certain extent, there are pastors who have followed that path of individualism, where they've withdrawn their church and their community from the public sphere. Again, there are dangers with participating for them.
Yeah.
But I think that as we're seeing, are very real dangers when the morally righteous people step back from the public sphere.
Right. When you think about contemporary events such as September 10th, the brutal murder of Charlie Kirk on with the internet, basically live television. A lot of pastors and churches, it seemed, as you were saying, they unintentionally became so irrelevant because they were staying out of these current issues that we've had a lot of people, and I'm connected with a lot of Calvary Chapel pastors in the state and throughout the nation. And so myself, I've firsthand experience, I've heard many pastors say, so many church folk were so disappointed that churches that they had been plugged into for so many years, not one mention of what took place, of Charlie Kirk's death.
Yeah.
And again, I think it was maybe a testimony of unintentionally seeking to be non-relevant. They become so non-relevant. And that something like what took place of Charlie Kirk dying, a man who clearly had a massive influence on our nation and still does, his life and his legacy. So it is interesting to see where I have seen, you're right, I think timidity, there's so much pressure of you keep that in the church, you stay out of the civic arena, you stay out of public policy. And one of the things I certainly want to see in our state, and I bet you would agree, Steve, and I said this in the closing prayer at the event that we shared together last week, I so desire to see that revival in the church in our state would turn into a great awakening, where there would be a returning to biblical thought in our state. There's such a massive divide, is there not? You think about you and I playing football in high school 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And, sure, maybe we were young and a little bit ignorant to things, but in 20 years, to see the divide that has happened in our nation and in our state, it almost seems irreconcilable. I know God can do anything, but, in our closing minutes together, let's share a little bit about what you're currently investigating as the Maine Wire editor-in-chief and things that you're seeing. What is at the heart of Steve Robinson? What would you love to see happen to our state? How can we get over some of these massive obstacles?
Well, I know this is kind of, people will laugh at this, but I'm just wishing for honest politicians.
Yeah.
I would take honest, Democrats over corrupt Republicans at any time, days or week. We have a serious organized crime problem in this state. And I'm not talking about, a political corruption of people siphoning donations. We have like the dictionary definition of organized crime.
Mm-hmm.
We have racketeering enterprises, multiple racketeering enterprises that are all operating in totally antisocial ways to the detriment of the livelihoods of Maine, to the culture of this state, to the very fabric of this state. And for reasons that, are hard to explain and are still somewhat mysterious to me, there are political leaders and law enforcement leaders in this state who won't speak truthfully about it or acknowledge it or act like it's a serious problem. But that to me is the biggest problem that our state faces right now. Is we are being ransacked by organized crime, multiple organized crime, whether it's Dominican organizations trafficking fentanyl into our low-income communities. I've gone into homeless camps in Portland, Bangor, and Sanford, Lewiston. I remember being in Bangor talking with a guy who brought me into the truck that he was living out of in this homeless camp.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me about the dealers. They'll get an Airbnb outside the camp. They'll come in and they know we've helpfully corralled all of these people together in one spot. And they come in and they give away free samples of fentanyl with a WhatsApp number. And if you sell it for them and make a profit, you send a message to that WhatsApp number.
Yeah.
And they've converted our most vulnerable people into their street level dealers.
Yeah.
That is organized crime. And every, objective assessment of it from New England area law enforcement bodies will say is being run by Dominican transnational drug trafficking organizations. It's just the facts. It's not Robert's opinion. Yeah, that is what is happening.
Right.
And then there's the Chinese organized crime trafficking in marijuana and human trafficking, by the way. And there's huge, massive exploitation of Chinese immigrants happening.
Yeah.
There was a case in, ironically, Freedom, Maine. There was a house that had been converted into a marijuana grow. Beautiful house, a nice big trout pond out behind it. The sheriff comes, they raid it, they cut down a bunch of pot plants, nobody gets arrested. And a few months later, there's an EMS response there, call at 6:30 in the morning for a gas leak or something. And I got the documents from that, the police report from the Waldo County Sheriff's Office, and 2 individuals died that morning from asphyxiation. They think it was carbon monoxide because something had gone wrong with the propane heater, but it's a little mysterious. Mm-hmm. They were illegal aliens from China who had been smuggled into the country and brought here for the purposes of working in cannabis houses. And they died in a house in Freedom, Maine, and no one claimed their bodies. And no one else in the state really reported on it or cared about it. And when you think about it, they were old enough to be from a generation when the one-child policy was still in effect. So there was a whole, 2 whole lines of Chinese families, really 4, coming to an end with these, anonymous deaths in Freedom, Maine, and 2 other individuals who were there who had, said that they were trafficked across the border and were here to work against their will, and they were just released. Who knows where they are now? That's happening all across the state in hundreds of locations at the prostitution brothels, the massage parlors, and the marijuana shops. Huge amounts of human trafficking happening. It's a criminal organization, and nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to admit that that's happening.
Steve, we have this in common. You said your number one desire is to see honesty from the top down, from honest politicians. So whether you're talking about corruption or fentanyl or homelessness, it goes back to an article I read of yours when you were a student at the Bowdoin Orient, where you talked about simple prohibition of vice. You talked about alcohol in that article. It can't just be a supply and demand. Yeah, we should deal with the supply, whether it's fentanyl, whether it's the corruption, whether it's the Chinese Communist Party. But ultimately, real hope and long-lasting change needs to be the demand of a human heart. And until people in Maine want honesty, we're not going to have honest politicians, because we, the people, still are the king. As much as our Constitution may be on fire, we still have a Constitution, and we still get to elect our representatives. And until the people of Maine desire wholeheartedly and inwardly truth, we will not have truthful politicians. So there's so much more I'd like to talk to you about.
Just on that point, though, briefly, I would say that the people of Maine are deprived of a standard to which they can hold their politicians unless there's a healthy, vibrant media.
Yeah.
You know, if
Well said.
if the media is simply regurgitating or giving the stamp of approval
Mhm.
to the version of events that
Yep.
the government says, which is safe, you can always say, like, the government said it. The Department of Health and Human Services said that the vaccine is going to stop you from
Right.
transmitting the virus. It's going to keep us all safe. Well, yes, they did say that. That is technically true.
Yeah.
There might be a little bit more to the story. But if you don't have an adversarial press that gives a standard that the politicians can be held to,
Mhm.
there's no metric to judge their honesty, their candor. Now, fortunately, because of what the Maine Wire has been doing, we have at least a little bit. We can say, like, well, Governor, why can't you talk about this Chinese organized crime thing? And why is your
Right.
brother doing real estate deals for these guys?
Yeah.
That's kind of weird. And she still won't talk about it.
Steve, you make a great point. Misinformation by the media is complicit in a lot of what is happening in our state, sadly. You have an open invite to here at the pastor's office. We are praying, and when I say we, I mean me, our staff. We are praying for you and your family, Steve. I know, sadly, that the world's a dangerous place. And, I've been at events where you have to have a security team now with you because of things that you're just reporting on truth. So we're praying for you. We're excited for you to soon be a dad in the coming spring. So Steve Robinson, thank you so much for being here at the pastor's office.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hey, thanks for tuning in to episode 4. And we have so much more ahead. So if you would please subscribe on our YouTube channel. Grace and peace to you.